Wonderful to see you too.
Yes, why are you aglow? Hello, everybody. We are live talking about Chris Bohjalian and his glowing face. We are so excited to have him with us on The Blaze on this Friday Frontliner. Welcome back to The Blaze, Chris.
Jenna, it is so wonderful to be back. This is at least the third time we've done this, and some viewers might recall that Jen and I first did this in January of 2021, literally during the Capitol insurrection. It's a much better day today.
I certainly hope that's true. We have a 45-minute interview, so we will see what transpires.
But and who the hell knows what could occur in Washington, D.C.
I know.
In the next 45 minutes.
We could just talk about that. We could just do a political show today, but we shan't because we have more exciting things to talk about, like Chris's new book, his 25th book, The JACKAL'S MISTRESS. Hello, Renee. Nice to see you. I see we have some repeat offenders, some repeat blazers joining us today, but in case you are new to The Blaze, I'm just going to do a little commercial. Welcome, welcome. We are a team of 30-plus professional creative volunteers dedicated to linking writers with new books and their readers, first in the age of COVID and now well beyond, now into our new strange political era. Instead, you can always trust The Blaze to connect you with your favorite authors without anybody even having to put on pants. We are on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, which I refuse to call X, Instagram. We are ubiquitous. If you like what you see here, please consider giving us a like or a follow. Sign up for our newsletter at www.mightyblaze.com to be informed of all literary events that are upcoming. You'll never have literary FOMO ever again. No more FOMO. Nobody likes that. Okay, that is.
I love any book event that begins with FOMO.
Right. I know. We don't want you to have FOMO. We want you guys to feel like you're plugged in all the time here, and also getting the behind the scenes scoop. We should talk about only behind the scenes stuff here. The first thing I'm going to do, however, is officially introduce Chris. And for those of you who have been living on a desert island, like in Lost, for the last 2 decades or 3 decades and don't know who Chris is, Chris, forgive me, I'm going to read an abbreviated bio because you're
super abbreviated. Keep it really short. I am
okay.
My history is so boring.
Your history is so accomplished that if I were just going to read all the accolades, the interview would be over and nobody would get to ask any questions. So I'm just going to kind of edit judiciously here as we go. Are you ready for your bio? Okay, buckle up.
Bring it on.
It's you. Chris Bohjalian is the #1 New York Times bestselling author of 25 books, including the novel we are here to talk about today, The JACKAL'S MISTRESS, as well as The Lioness, Hour of the Witch, Midwives, which was an Oprah pick, The Flight Attendant, which has been made into a Max series starring Kaylee Cuoco, which I loved. His other books include The Red Lotus, The Guest Room, Close Your Eyes, Hold Hands, The Sandcastle Girls, Skeletons at the Feast, and The Double Bind. You guys all recognize these titles. His novels Secrets of Eden, Midwives, and Past the Bleachers were made into movies, and his work has been translated into more than 35 languages. Yes, this is the abbreviated version of Chris's bio. He's also a playwright, Wingspan and Midwives. He lives in Vermont, the beautiful 802, and can be found at chrisbohjalian.com and on Facebook, Insta, X, Goodreads, TikTok, and basically everywhere in the air. And if you haven't been on Chris's socials, you should definitely follow him. He is great at doing social media. I don't know how he has time to do this. And you'll also see his dog, Jessie, who I love, and his cat, Nugget, and his other. You have 2 more cats, I think, right?
Right. We've got 3 cats. We've got Velvet, who is 21.
God bless.
We've got 7, who is 19, and we've got Nugget, who is 2.
That's right. So if you want to be invited into the Chris Bohjalian menagerie, you can do that. And if you go to his socials, he will take you on a ride every day of the ride of being Chris Bohjalian, which is amazing. And Nugget, the latest cat, his talented wife, who Chris calls his lovely bride, Victoria Brewer, who's a photographer, adopted Nugget from a shelter. And Chris drinks a lot of Negronis, chin chin. Although I don't think you have Negroni today, right? We have.
No. It is only 4:00 Eastern time, so I'm still in the Red Bull phase.
I mean, I don't even know why this is not Negroni time. I thought about doing it, but then I was too busy with lipstick to make a Negroni. So next time you have to come back with the next book. So
we've got to do 2 things. We've got to break out the vermouth for Negronis, and we've got to get a Henry and Jessie play date going.
I would love that.
the movie The Friend, based on the Sigrid Nunes novel, is opening today. And it reminded me that Jenna is not merely a fantastic, brilliant novelist, but she is responsible for the single best human dog memoir ever, Woodrow on the Bench. I mean, literally, my two favorite books about dogs, fiction and nonfiction. Fiction, Sigrid Nunes, The Friend. Nonfiction, Jenna's Woodrow on the Bench. So, chin chin to you and all of your remarkable accomplishments.
Oh my gosh. Thank you, Chris. I didn't even pay Chris to say that. I told him in the green room if he said that he would make me cry. So I'm like a little bit prepared to try and not cry. But I thank you. Woodrow thanks you. My current dog, Henry, would thank you, except he's totally bored by this whole interviewing thing and would rather be playing with Jessie in the woods. We should make that happen with Negronis because I think I need that to just watch the fabulous.
Can you imagine? Okay, that sounds real. Can you imagine bringing thermoses of Negronis up like Campbell's Hump or something in Vermont?
Yes, I absolutely can do that. And I think it should happen this summer and we'll put cameras on. Okay. We'll put GoPros on us and the dogs and then just like watch all hell break loose. That is a promise. You guys heard me make that promise. We're going to do that. Actually, I go to the woods.
In 2005, I was hiking Mount Lafayette in New Hampshire in the White Mountains, and there were about 7 of us. And one of the 7 of us was my sister-in-law's boyfriend from France. And I don't know, we've been hiking for about 4 hours, and my water bottle is about empty. So he offers me his. And I loved it. He actually had a wineskin filled with red wine.
Oh, God. Well, of course, because he's French. He has to. I think that's brilliant. I think they would strip him of citizenship if he actually just had water in there. It is true that in the summer I go hiking with my dear friend Tom Shampoo, who helped found the Blaze, and he brings gin and tonics made with gunpowder gin, which is the best gin in the world. And we do a great hike every day. And then we have gin at gin o'clock, which is about now. Okay.
Okay, that might be really good gin, but fun fact for any Blazers watching who've read Hour of the Witch, my 2021 novel. The character in it, Peregrine, is named after Appalachian Gap Distillery's Peregrine Gin.
Really?
Because when I was finalizing the book in the spring of 2020, it was the start of the pandemic, and I figured, you are drinking so much of this gin. You really, really need to name a character after it and give a shout out to your booze. So I renamed one of the heroes or heroines of the book Peregrine.
I love it. I love shout out to booze. Give a shout out to the booze should be a hashtag for every writer, I think. I love it.
Someday I'll dedicate a book to Red Bull.
I'm gonna have to try the Peregrine gin and the gunpowder. So now we have another thing to do. We have to have a gin tasting. It would be delightful. All right, I want to ask, first of all, I know this is your 25th book. If this were a marriage, it would be your silver anniversary. 25 books is an accomplishment that just boggles my mind. And I want to ask how this feels for you. Does it feel like your 25th book? Does it feel like this is just the one that I'm focusing on right now because I'm in love with it?
25 is a big number. And there were points in my career when if you'd said to me, you will last in this business long enough to get to 25 books, I would have scoffed. Yeah. But I've been really, really fortunate. This is not merely my 25th book. This is now my 30th year with Penguin Random House. It is my 15th year with Doubleday Books. And in my 30 years with Penguin Random House, I've only had 2 editors. That is just an unbelievable blessing. And what I find most remarkable is this. I have not merely written 25 books. I have damn well survived 35 book tours. That is Iron Human triathlon kind of stuff.
It's writer triathlon. You're like the writer Ironman with Negronis. I also want to give a shout out to your current editor, Jenny Jackson, who I just love, who is a fabulous author herself, who wrote Pineapple Street. We had her on, and I am like a weirdo Jenny fangirl. I went to a book festival in Michigan because I knew she was going to be there. She and Peter Heller. I'm like, I'm sorry, I'm quite deliberately here to stalk you. So I was thinking about this today when I was thinking about Jackal and about these questions that I wanted to ask about it, but also about just the fantastic longevity of your career. And I was trying to imagine what it was like to be Chris Bohjalian starting out with the first book, which is called A Killing in the Real World. And if you could close your eyes and kind of go back in that Brady time machine and be in your Chris Bohjalian skin at the start of that journey, like, where are you? Set the scene for us when you started writing A Killing in the Real World. Like, what is that scene like?
Okay, I'm going to talk about A Killing in the Real World. I want to add on to one thing you said about Jenny Jackson. Not only is she a brilliant novelist, I mean, I loved Pineapple Street. Her next book is going to be a total banger. She's also a brilliant editor. And it has been such a gift to have her as my editor, going all the way back to the Sandcastle Girls, the first book we did together. Now, going way back in time, A Killing in the Real World, I had been writing short stories and getting rejected relentlessly. Harper's, The Atlantic, Ellery Queen, Alfred Hitchcock's magazine, and I'm writing them between 5 and 7 a.m. in the morning before going to work at an ad agency in New York City. When I got rejection slip number 250, I thought to myself, plan A, not working. Time to try plan B. Now, at the time, Cosmopolitan was publishing a lot of fiction. So I rounded up 6 months worth of Cosmos, read them thoroughly to try to understand what constituted a Cosmos story, and then I wrote one. It's about a female supermodel who lives in a spectacular loft in lower Manhattan, but her marriage is a little bit dicey. So one weekend, she goes out to her equally cool beach house on the Atlantic Ocean, Fire Island, to see if the marriage can be saved, but instead spends the entire time playing scantily clad beach volleyball. Cosmopolitan bought it. First story I ever sold, and ironically, first time I ever wrote from a woman's point of view. So the story appears in print, and literary agents approach me, and they all ask, why have you not written a novel? And the answer was simple. I was scared, intimidated. A novel is a marathon, and I wasn't ready. But urged on by one agent, I gave up the immediate gratification of trying to write the immediate gratification of writing short stories. And 11 months later, I had a novel. And the agent sold it instantly in a bidding war. Is it because I'm a really good novelist and I was a really terrible short story writer? No. It was late 1980s. Bright Lights, Big City, Less Than Zero, Slaves of New York. You write a novel with 20-somethings doing cocaine in a bathroom in the East Village, and someone is going to buy it. I could have given that agent a grocery list, cookies, cat food, cocaine, and she would have been able to sell it. So the book appears in print, and I was still sufficiently deluded and young that I did not realize I had written the single worst first novel ever published, bar none. There is no first novel worse than A Killing in the Real World. Jen and I have spoken in the past a little bit about Donna Tartt. Donna Tartt did something really amazing. She wrote a fantastic first novel, The Secret History, which meant that the bar was really high for her second novel. I took the opposite tact. I wrote a terrible first novel so I could only get better. But here's the irony of A Killing in the Real World, worst first novel ever. Remember, I'm working at an ad agency. I didn't go to Iowa to get an MFA. So I don't know a lot of writers, and I have to get a blurb. There's one other writer at this ad agency. He's published 3 or 4 mysteries, none of which were big sellers, but they're published by a real publisher. He was the creative director of the ad agency. So I went to him for the blurb, and he was kind and gracious and giving, and he blurbed the book. And if you look at the back of A Killing in the Real World, you will see a blurb by, and before I tell you his name, I've got to tell you the appellation as well, because that shows you how funny this is. Here's who blurbed my first book. James Patterson, author of Black Market. They literally have to say about James Patterson, he wrote a book called Black Market because no one at the time has any idea who in hell James Patterson is.
That's fascinating. I was thinking Scott Turow, who we just spoke with. I was trying to imagine who it was. That is such a good origin story.
I had dinner with Scott Turow when I was in college. We went to the same place. We both went to Amherst. He's a few years ahead of me. He goes to Harvard. He writes a book called 1L about being in his first year at Harvard Law School. And when I was a freshman at Amherst, the professor of a course I was taking called Perspectives on the Professions, in which you examine law, medicine, and religious, the clergy through literature. So we read 1L, and because I was such a young eager beaver, and so excited to be in this class, that I go to dinner with Scott Turow when he came back to talk to us about writing 1L.
That's amazing. I think one thing that strikes me about both you and Scott is you have these very full lives. Like, you are able to be on tour for books and produce books at the same time, and still manage to do social media, and still drink Negronis, and still hang out with Victoria, and still go to Victoria's showings, and and Grace experience, your daughter, who is an extremely accomplished actress who is fantastic. I wonder this about like people of great energy, how you get everything done. But I'm thinking about like the sort of origin story for Jackal also, which is a great origin story. Before we get to that, can you just give us a thumbnail of what the book is in your own words, for those who haven't had a chance to read it yet?
Yeah. The Jackal's Mistress is a Civil War Romeo and Juliet. It's a love story about the North and South, based on a harrowing, dangerous, true story. An abolitionist in the Vermont Brigade is left for dead in 1864 in Virginia's Shenandoah Valley. His life is saved largely by a rebel woman whose husband is a Confederate soldier somewhere in the Union POW camp. And she makes this decision, and this is the real life part of the book. She makes this decision because this is a human being, even if he is a Yankee blue belly, and if her husband was left to die in Maryland or Pennsylvania, she would want a Yankee woman, coarse as that Yankee woman might be, to try and save his life, or at least not force him to die alone. I was told about this story in 2003 by an editor at Reader's Digest named Gary Sledge. And so I researched the story and wrote about it.
Oh, you have the Reader's Digest. Fantastic.
Yeah, I do. It appears in the 2003 Reader's Digest, the story of Vermont's Henry Bedell and Virginia's Betty Van Meter, and their brief few-month journey together while she is hiding him from John Mosby's Confederate Rangers and Jubal Early's Confederate Army, and along with two formerly enslaved people who are working a grist mill with her, tries to keep him alive, and then tries to bring him back across the Union lines to Harper's Ferry in West Virginia. So the story runs in 2003. I wasn't writing historical fiction then. I was writing books like Midwives and The Double Bind, and never crossed my mind there was a novel in this. In 2022, I was on tour for the Lioness, and I was in Richmond, Virginia. And you feel the weight of the Civil War far more in Virginia than you do in Vermont. I mean, in Vermont, the only Civil War moment we had was a botched bank robbery up near the Canadian border in St. Albans, Vermont. But in Richmond, you really feel it. Plus, this was only 2 summers after the statues of the treasonous Confederate generals and Jefferson Davis had finally been taken down. And I thought of that story I had written years earlier for the first time and thought, if ever our country needed a novel about healing and how two people with wildly different worldviews wildly divergent political opinions could figure it out, it was now. And so I did an even deeper dive into the research, traveling from Maryland to Richmond, visiting the Museum of Civil War Medicine and the Third Battle of Winchester and Berryville, where Betty Van Meter hid Henry Bedell. And I spent hours and hours in the college archives and days with Civil War historians. And before I knew it, I had a novel, The Jackal's Mistress. Now,
so good.
In real life, there is no reason to believe either A, that Betty Van Meter and Henry Bedell were lovers. In my novel, not a spoiler, they might be. In real life, there's no reason to believe that Betty Van Meter was as proficient with a Colt pistol as my heroine and protagonist, Libby Stedman, is by the end of the novel. But I sure had a great time researching that.
Did you actually take gun courses? Did you learn?
I did not take gun courses, but I did have a great time with a Civil War historian actually a couple Civil War historians who really know their weaponry. One of my favorite guys I interviewed is just the most delightful, sweet, kind man in the world. His name is Dr. Canbury. He is a family practitioner right here in Vermont. One of his ancestors was a Union hero at Chancellorsville. And so he's got both, his ancestors' dress saber and battle saber. But he's also an expert on Civil War medicine because as a physician, he's fascinated. And the first time I met him in Randolph, Vermont, he said to me, "Would you like to see my bone saws?" And I was thinking, wow, you are suddenly in Stephen King's Misery. Where is this going? Right. And of course, he does have a couple bone saws, but he's so sweet and so kind. But he really did open my eyes a lot, not merely to the realities of Civil War medicine, but what it must have been like to be my main male character in this novel, Jonathan Weybridge, who has most of a leg blown off, what's left surgically amputated, and much of a hand blown off. I don't want to give you the impression there's a lot of gruesome stuff in this book, because there isn't. But it was important for me to understand the realities of Civil War weaponry and Civil War medicine.
I saw a question pop up from Renee. How much research did you do for the book? And then time-wise versus writing. But I think, Renee, one of the questions I wanted to ask Chris was precisely about this. I know he researches his book on the ground. He goes to the places. He went to Vietnam for Red Lotus, went to Africa for the Lioness. I knew instinctively that he had been in Virginia and to all the battle places writing this book. And I did not know about the bone saws. But I think actually probably the scariest movie scene I've ever seen, including in The Shining, was the scene in Gone with the Wind when one of the soldiers, Confederate soldiers, is having his leg.
Don't take my leg!
Not my leg! Not my leg! Oh! Oh my God, it is. I still can't watch it. I have to watch it through my fingers. And I was thinking about that a little bit when I was reading. It's true that
they did that, all of that Atlantis stuff, without CGI. Can you imagine?
Yeah. Yes. Actually, I am so struck by that. The difference between that and, for instance, Titanic, which was all CGI. That film was just so massive. The burning of Atlanta, the actual burning. They probably actually cut that guy's leg off for all we know. It's entirely possible. But I was.
Well, it was his big break. He was probably into it. He was probably into studio system. Okay, you can have my leg, but I want a 4-picture deal.
Right, exactly. And I have to be the amputee in all of your war stories going forward. It's not a bad deal if you think about it for an extra. I was really thinking about the difficulty of writing war scenes. And I will say about Jackal, and I'm just going to call it Jackal because I like to call it Jackal. But I think that, and it's a great title, by the way, there aren't a lot of battle scenes here, but the book is very visceral. Like, it's full of viscera. And I think in that era, not everybody is on a screen. Like, everything you process is done physically. And I do want to ask about that. But first, I want to ask about sort of girding yourself to write the war scenes, the battle scenes, because there are a couple of them, one in which Captain Weybridge, who's one of the story's heroes, along with Libby Stedman, the abolitionist Vermont captain, loses his leg. And I know you reread Red Badge of Courage and also Charles Fraser's excellent Cold Mountain. That's one of my favorite books. And I was thinking, was it difficult to write the battle scenes, to put yourself in that position? How do you do it? Do you feel like you have to sort of recontribute something to writing a battle scene, to the sort of literature of battle? Just talk about that experience a little bit, if you will.
Sure. Okay, I'm going to move my computer, and I don't know if this is going to work.
Okay.
There is my Civil War bookshelf.
Nice. Okay.
You can't see the books necessarily, but I want you to see the length and how many there are.
There's some thick volumes. Thank you for the sneak peek. We love that here at Place.
And many of those are diaries, memoirs, and letters. Mm-hmm. Civil War soldiers and generals and officers left behind so many accounts of battle. Also, and I find this unbelievably moving, the Civil War was the first war where photography was a participant. It wasn't simply that photographers like Matthew Brady or John Gardner were photographing Antietam or Gettysburg. It's that many of these soldiers marched off to war with tintypes of their loved ones. And when you look at the battlefield horrors, the day after one of these battles, whether it's Chancellorsville, Fredericksburg, Gettysburg, Antietam, you don't just see fields and fields of corpses of young men. You see fields and fields of corpses of young men, often holding in their hands a tintype of mom, of dad, of girlfriend, of wife, of children. So many of those corpses died looking at their loved ones. This was the first war that was meticulously documented in letter, memoir, and in photograph. Mm-hmm. So when I was writing a battlefield scene, I had plenty to work with. Moreover, I also had a really high bar to live up to. You mentioned, for example, Cold Mountain and the Red Badge of Courage. There's so many of the Killer Angels. There is a large library of novels about the Civil War, many of which have battle scenes. So I wanted to make sure that my battle scene did three things. Number one, I didn't embarrass myself compared to Charles Fraser or Stephen Crane or Michael Shara. Number two, I wanted it to be authentic to the general notion of any Civil War battle, what we know occurred. And number three, I wanted to make it accurate in terms of what in real life Henry Bedell likely endured in September of 1864, 20 miles southwest of Harper's Ferry. Mm-hmm. How did that man in real life get wounded? How was I going to pay homage respectfully to that individual? When you write historical fiction, and my God, you know this as well as anyone from your own magnificent work, you can get people to read about things they would not necessarily read about in nonfiction. I learned this firsthand with the Sandcastle Girls in 2012, my novel about the Armenian genocide. If I had written a memoir about my grandparents and the Armenian genocide, no one would have read it. But by presenting it as a novel and a love story, it educated millions of people around the world to the Armenian genocide. So in The Jackal's Mistress, I wanted to tell a story about the Civil War that people who are absolutely uninterested in the Civil War would read. So they would understand more about what was going on then, which is why The Jackal's Mistress is fundamentally, I think, a love story.
Mm-hmm. A love story, a friendship story between Libby and Captain Weybridge, Jonathan. Yeah. There are also a couple of side characters, if you will, or best supporting actors who I love a lot, Joseph and Sally, who are the freed servants of Libby's absent husband, Peter, who is up fighting the Yankees. And then I have to say, I think my favorite character is Libby's niece, Jubilee, who is a whole bundle of sass. Like, she is just the sassy. She reminded me a little bit of the Renee Zellweger character in the movie of Cold Mountain, who's like, nah, wubba, 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 love talk. She tells it like it is, you know? And she is the one who gives Waybridge, when he is captive in their house, unable to move because he's lost his legs. She kind of sits in his bedroom with him and torments him and calls him a jackal. And why, and, you know, talking about him being a Yankee and a blue belly, and he cannot get away from her, and she's so funny. So I wanted to ask about the provenance of Jubilee, who I personally love, and then also like writing Joseph and Sally, because I feel like it must be very delicate in this day and age to remain true to people who were doing heroic things and who were people of color and freed slaves, and yet also want to be respectful about appropriating. You know, this is a tough thing, right? So can you please talk about all three of these people?
Sure. Let's begin with Jubilee. I too love Jubilee. She is among my very favorite characters I've ever written. She's 12 years old. In reality, we know that Betty Van Meter had a 10-year-old niece living with her. We only know the child's age. We do not even know her name. She's simply a 10-year-old niece. Well, in the novel, the niece is 12. She's kind of a tween, and she has no filter. She will literally say anything, and she has real grievances. And she has the grievances that I think a 12-year-old girl would be likely to have in this situation, beginning with this. Her crazy Aunt Libby is not merely bringing a Yankee blue belly into the house, endangering all of them. She is hiding him in her, Libby's, bedroom, because she believes that no Southern man would ever look into a woman's bedroom. That would be just too coarse. But that also means that all of a sudden Jubilee has to share her bed with her aunt. So she's lost her room. She's lost the privacy of her own bed. And now she's got this 20-something Yankee professor from Vermont judging her opinion. And she's constantly having to help feed him, clean his slop jar because he can't walk to the outhouse. And he does nothing, in her opinion, but eat their food, which they've got precious little of. So she is, yes, awash in grievance. And she does christen him the Jackal. And I love her. And I love the way her relationship and Jonathan Waybridge, my Yankee soldier, grows over the course of the novel. And which brings me back to Sally and Joseph. Sally and Joseph are the two formerly enslaved people who have chosen to remain in 1860 working the grist mill with Peter Stedman in the novel, who owns the grist mill, when the other 10 formerly enslaved people have been emancipated by Peter. These two, because they are in their 60s, have chosen to remain. And Joseph has chosen to remain because his deal with Peter is they're going to be in this together, working it together, and he's going to be paid real money. But of course, the Civil War comes first. And so now Joseph and Sally are working with Libby to try and keep the grist mill running, with almost all of the flour they make confiscated by the Army of Northern Virginia Confederates. And the messaging in the book was really interesting to me because I wanted to understand both why have these two chosen to remain, and what are Jonathan Waybridge of Vermont's preconceptions. Here, Jonathan Waybridge of Vermont views himself as an abolitionist, teaches at Middlebury College, was really excited, mourning too. But, when John Brown's body in 1859 and 1860 is making the rounds of northern Vermont in the casket before being buried, Middlebury College kids and professors just want to touch the casket because it is John Brown's body's casket. And he is shocked, he being Jonathan Waybridge, and then embarrassed when he realizes that both Sally and Joseph, the two formerly enslaved people, both can read. Mm-hmm. And he's then really disappointed in himself that he didn't assume that as grown-ups, of course they can read. And this is the kind of subtle messaging that was important for me to make clear. The kind of messaging that, you can see, and not a spoiler, when at one point in the novel, Jubilee is asking her Aunt Libby, why the heck are all of these people dying on both sides? Why is the North making such a big deal about this? If they're still demanding that somebody like Joseph, one of the best men I will ever know, is supposed to, sleep with the boys and the groomsmen and the horses and the sheds and doesn't get a nice hotel room of his own.
Yeah, Jonathan is missing some nuances. I think that's part of the point. When you put people on opposite sides together and they've been fed only propaganda about each other, like they're not going to be understanding the subtleties of being human that actually bind us all together, which is one of the questions that I wanted to ask about how this novel, like any good historical fiction, reflects us back to ourselves. But before that, I wanted to just comment on Libby's and Joseph's and Sally's and Jubilee's plight of, emptying the slop jar and not having enough food. And I was always struck by the fact that if I'd lived through the Civil War or World War II or any historical fiction, you don't get coffee in the morning. You have to drink coffee made of chicory or, leaves, or I thought I would just not do well in war without my coffee. But as I said earlier, the viscera of their lives is so... You did such a beautiful job with that, writing about how difficult and how physical their lives all were, not just because of the era. And this, by the way, guys, is an 1860 apartment. My home was built in 1860, so I feel like reading this book here gave a special kinship to this book. I feel like Libby's life in particular struck me. I mean, I know she's 20-something. She's a lot more rubbery than I am at my age, but still, she's running a grist mill. She is... constantly being exposed to danger on all sides. There are people marauding from both armies where she lives. There are people from the north. There are people from the south. There are stragglers from both armies. The book opens with her being threatened by one of these men. I won't give more away than that. And then there's just not enough to eat, and you never sleep, and she has to learn to use a gun, and they work all the time. Just this sort of privation of that, plus no coffee. Like, what do you think? Like, I always try to put myself in the position of the heroes and heroines of books that I read. Like, do you think we would be able to stand that? I mean, during the pandemic, there was this great meme that said, our forefathers fought in D-Day. We have to lie on the couch and watch Netflix. You can do this, and yet still we were all like, oh, boo-hoo, I just thought, do you think we in our generation would be able to make it through the Civil War? And maybe we might have to, but like, what was your sense writing that very physical experience?
I thought a lot of something I once heard the great historian David McCullough say to Terry Gross. This was 2016, 2017. And Terry Gross said to David, speaking as an historian, have you ever seen our country as divided as we are now? And David had a great laugh. And David laughed, said, oh, well, Terry, there was that dust up in 1861 and 1968 wasn't pretty. I thought of that often. Writing this book, 1968 wasn't pretty. Good Lord, 2021, the insurrection of the Capitol, wasn't pretty. I am the worst person in the world for political prognostication. There is literally no political trend I cannot get wrong. There is no political tea leaf I cannot misread. So, my hope for this particular book, in terms of the viscera and the messaging, can we, as humans in 2025, endure what people endured in 1865? I sure as heck hope we don't have to. But I also know that the plight of an awful lot of people in other parts of the world right now is pretty awful, pretty horrific. I would not want to be on the Ukrainian front lines, but there are people there in the eastern part of Ukraine fighting like heck for their sovereignty. The world is a scary place in 2025. It was a scary place in 1865. And as Faulkner said, you know, whatever that great quote is, the past isn't past. The past isn't dead. It isn't even past.
Yep. Yes, I think about that a lot. Do you think if your characters, this isn't a question that I had scripted, but if your characters from this book could speak to you and me right now, and Chuck and Karen who are producing this, and our wonderful viewers and readers who are watching this, what would those characters say about our current situation? It's not a prognostication, but like, what would they say?
Okay, I think Jonathan Weybridge, abolitionist from Vermont, would say something along the lines of, I didn't lose a leg and a sizable part of one hand so that all of you would treat, not all of you, so that many of you would treat immigrants and people of color as second-class citizens or as the other. I think Libby Stedman, my heroine, would say something along the lines of, I didn't go through hell and high water to keep this man alive, only to see my people in the South and certain people in the North once again try and tear this country apart. And I think Jubilee, 12-year-old Jubilee, would say something along the lines of, oh man, does something happen between adolescence and adulthood where you just lose your gosh darn mind? What are you people thinking as grown-ups? Can you learn nothing from the past?
That was a great Jubilee impression. You got to put your hands on your hips to be saying that. I was kind of like a little bit afraid to hear what Jubilee would say because I thought it might be a bit blue, but no, she's just.
Okay.
All right.
Jubilee circa 2025 would be unbelievably blue, but Jubilee 1864, no, less so.
Jubilee 2025 would be a TikTok superstar, I think.
She would be. I think I'm the oldest man on TikTok.
What?
I think I'm the oldest man on TikTok. Maybe not.
No, I don't think so. No, I don't think you are. And also you do a great job on TikTok. So Robin asked the question, haven't we learned anything? This is my question. It's funny. It's the last line of one of my favorite books of all time, which is The Stand by Stephen King. One of the characters says to the other one, do you think people ever really learn anything? And then there's a beat. And then the other character says, I don't know. I don't know. Right. And I feel like this is what we do. We write into that void and say, this is what has happened. This is our lesson that we can carry forward. Are we going to take this lesson? I don't know. So we each have to do our conscience. I guess I could ask, and then we should open it up to audience questions. But what do you think that you as a writer, and what do you think our readers watching this broadcast can do if they have strong feels about our current situation?
Okay. First of all, we are underestimating the importance of local elections, school board elections, for example, library board elections. We are in the midst of a world right now where a very small minority of people in the United States are getting a lot of books banned, for instance, including, here's a weird one for you, in 2023, part of Florida banned my novel Midwives. I mean, I don't know if it's anywhere near the numbers of books banned as other writers, but still. So first of all, think local, because what happens in your community is affected by your select board, your mayor, your town council. Secondly, the House of Representatives is obviously red right now, but the numbers are so close. We've got midterm elections coming up. Be sure and be active and care about those midterm elections. Third, the judiciary. Judges matter and elections matter. On a national level, on a state level, think about the candidates and what ramifications your vote has, not simply for legislation, but for who's going to be the next judges. Finally, don't listen to charlatans. So many people in the last presidential election, and this is fine, they voted their pocketbook. You sometimes have to vote your pocketbook, and I will never, ever criticize anyone for voting on the cost of gasoline or the cost of eggs or the cost of milk. I get it. I totally get it. But when a charlatan tells you that they are going to solve worldwide economic problems, don't necessarily believe them when so many of those problems have to do with geopolitical forces over which that charlatan has no control, whether it is an invasion of Ukraine, whether it is a worldwide pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
You know, vote your mind as well as your purse.
Mm-hmm. Love that. Don't vote for charlatans. Another hashtag that has come out of this broadcast. I think that's right. And don't forget to vote in general.
And I should also tell you this. I mean, celebrities and authors, and I'm putting myself in the second category. I'm an author. I'm not a celebrity. 99% of the voters do not give a damn what we think. If four of the most powerful, brilliant women on this planet, Michelle Obama, Beyonce, Taylor Swift, Hillary Clinton, can't get Kamala Harris elected, no celebrity can.
Oh, that's a tough thing. Yeah, somebody in our audience, Pat, made a comment about doing more than just voting, and I think that's interesting. When I was out on tour with Those Who Save Us many moons ago, somebody asked, did I think that what happened in Nazi Germany could happen here? And of course, I said, yes, it can happen anywhere because people are people. And she said, well, what could we do? What would we do? It was a question I got a lot. And I can't speak for anybody else, but I think people need to do whatever they can do, whatever you feel called upon to do. That is your thing. That is your purview. That is your skill. That is your passion. And then if you do some little thing every day, like anything else, you write a page every day, you eventually write a book. 365 days, you write a book. You go out in March, you do something, do the school board thing. Sorry, Chris, I'm stepping on you here, but I think...
No, you're not. You're raising a great point. The only other thing I will add is that I try not to demonize ever people who disagree with me politically. And I'll give you one really good example.
Yeah.
There are 3 older male readers who I've never met, but we interact on the social sometimes. And they know that I voted for Kamala Harris, and I know that all 3 of them voted for Donald Trump. And after Donald Trump won, all of them said in one way or another to me on the socials, and it was weirdly, wonderfully delightful. You didn't win, but we're still going to read your books. And if your book tour brings you to Louisville, we got to have some sipping whiskey together. We are not going to change your mind. That is so clear. And you are not going to change our minds. That is so clear. But we can at least talk about books and movies and why in holy hell you still root for the Mets.
Like, you're not going to change my mind about that either.
No, but I mean, I just love the fact that despite the fact we so fundamentally disagree politically, if the 4 of us were in the same room together, I think it would be unbelievably civil in the same way that once upon a time, 4 U.S. senators, 2 blue and 2 red, could be part of the same Senate singing group.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Or the Supreme Court with like people of very different political beliefs being best friends. I'm wondering, again, it recalls The Jackal's Mistress. Every time I say the title, the book appears, The Jackal's Mistress, but it recalls the fact of getting people together who should be sworn enemies and in fact are sworn enemies by the decades of their time. And they put them together in the same house and they're like, oh, you're human. And I think that, a lot of people who say what they say to me online would never say it to my face. And in fact, would be like, oh, cute dog, So I think what you are doing in writing this book and continuing to write your books, and particularly with The Jackal's Mistress, what you're doing is demonstrating how humans can be humans and not just arguments, shouting into the void in that way. And I appreciate that.
I mean, these days, whenever I'm political on the socials, it's because there's something funny because there's a joke in it. And I mean, I really don't. I don't scream my politics under the social void because that's not productive for me.
Right.
What is productive for me is knowing, for example, that, again, to go to those three guys in Louisville, Kentucky, we don't agree politically, but we're still in conversation.
Right.
And so long as you're in conversation, who knows where it's going to go.
Right.
I mean, they will never take me away from the New York Mets. But, maybe someday they might see that, as Atticus Finch, tells Scout Finch, to really understand somebody else, you have to walk, in their shoes and understand that Canada's not our enemy. We don't need Greenland.
Yeah, we don't. We have a lot going on. We don't need another state, another very large state, I might add. And it's good to know that you have the hard boundary about the Mets. You have to set a line somewhere. Okay, I'm going to let somebody else ask questions. I've kept you almost an hour, unbelievably. Robin wants to know, and Robin, thank you for all of your comments. We see you. A question, if there's time for both of you, what is your favorite treasure on the beautiful bookshelves behind you? That is a great question.
Okay, well, I can certainly pick two of my favorite books, Those Who Save Us by Jenna Blum, or Woodrow on the Bench by Jenna Blum.
Coincidentally, right behind me.
Just so I don't have to get out of my chair, I will show you one book I have with me. This is an 1869 book. It is The Vermont Brigade in the Shenandoah Valley. It is written by Middlebury College's valedictorian class of 1862, Aldous Walker. And in chapter 8 of this little book is the 6-page episode, he calls it, in which a member of the Vermont Brigade, Henry Bedell's life is saved by a Virginian, Betty Van Meter. And if you read the Jackal's Mistress, what I find most interesting is this. Jonathan Weybridge's wounds are almost exactly Henry Bedell's, but Jonathan Weybridge's voice is almost exactly Aldous Walker's, the Middlebury College valedictorian.
Oh, that's great. Oh, I
wanted a character who could be, in the context of this story, articulate. Not that Vermont farmers in 1864 weren't articulate, because their letters are amazing, but a literature professor at Middlebury College who is suddenly at the age of 24 in real life, a major in the Vermont Brigade because the attrition is so high. I just found that catnip.
That's amazing. What is the provenance of the book?
The provenance of the book is, when I was writing the Reader's Digest story back in 2003, using those careful gloves, I was able to look at this book in the Middlebury College archives, because that's where Aldous Walker's papers are held. And when I realized I was going to write this novel, I tracked down a copy of my own so that I can hold it without having to use those college archival gloves.
I love it. Thank you so much. I love that. Guys, that was worth the price of admission right there. But this whole conversation has been priceless. Chris, thank you so much for spending time with us, talking about Jackal, talking about politics, talking about commonalities among people. It is always such a joy to have you with us, and so edifying. And we just love it. Please write another book in a year so you can come back. We know you will.
Oh, Jenna, thank you. Jenna, thank you for all that you do. I want to thank A Mighty Blaze for all that A Mighty Blaze does behind the scenes. Thank you, Chuck. Shad Shinodogol. Chuck is Armenian. Thank you, Karen. I'm so grateful to A Mighty Blaze. And I want to thank all of you readers and blazers out there. Thank you for enduring my work. And thank you for enduring my digressions into politics.
We love it. We love you, Chris. This is why we love you. And we love you, Blaze readers. Thank you so much for spending part of your Friday afternoon with us. And we'll see you next time on The Blaze.